I'd say when you have that time and you're sitting in the woods or on the water and you're doing that mindless task, which is restful in itself, you get an opportunity to pay attention to some very small details that just reveal some attributes of the Creator. You know, when do you just look at this little Tweety bird versus that Tweety bird and start noticing the little differences in them, and you think, wow, he created this into that level of detail?
Yeah.
You know,
so I think what you're describing there, Will, is what I heard a pastor describe one time as letting it roll up into worship. Imagine God creating this and those details and those differences and him being that intimately involved in all aspects of creation. Is that kind of what you're going there?
If he went to the level of detail to make this little item so beautiful for your enjoyment, how much more does he love you on the things you actually care about?
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we take a deeper dive into Sunday's message and explore any questions you might have. I'm your host, AJ Stevens, joined by lead pastor Chip Parker, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime member of the Orchard or a first-time visitor, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spirituality, and daily life, seeking to understand how the wisdom shared on Sundays can be applied to our modern challenges. So grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's dive in together. This is Let's Talk About That, where the conversation about Sunday's message never stops.
All right, so we are back with our, third episode in January already, which is kind of wild, 2025. And we have some more new guests today, making his, 11th return to the podcast is Trey Lee. How many times have you been on the podcast?
3 or 4.
Not 11.
Not 11.
Okay, so 3 or 4 for Trey, and making his podcast debut, the man, the myth, the legend, McCrea.
Sticks McMorning. Chip, the only person that calls me that.
I try and look, normally when I throw a nickname out for somebody, it sticks. It hasn't stuck. Oh, wow. I did that, didn't I? It hasn't stuck with Sticks here. Matter of fact, this is how I know that when I force a nickname on people, like it just takes, because we were talking after the podcast we recorded last week, and Chris, the Deucer, was in here talking with us. And shout out, birthday, Saturday for the Deucer, so happy birthday.
31.
But we were talking, and he said that when they were at Jingle Jam, that everybody at Jingle Jam that he'd never met before from other locations referred to him as, hey, Deucer, hey, Mr. Deucer. And then actually Jules, his wife, got called Miss Deucer. What time?
Oh, my.
So to be clear, because I think there's some, confusion around it, Deucer is short for producer, as in the producer of the show.
Okay, I would have never caught that.
Okay, I was just making sure.
Okay.
All right. So
it took like 3 or 4 episodes to figure it out, but I was like, oh, that's pretty clever, actually.
Yeah. Apparently, you guys have more juvenile minds than I do, because I never thought of any other option.
Yeah, I thought that was an inside bathroom joke.
Yeah.
Office.
Yeah. No, there wasn't. It was just short for producer, and the fact that I don't think things through sometimes.
Okay.
So we're still working on Sticks McCrea, better known as Will McCrea over here. And so, Will, first episode on the podcast, do you have nerves?
Some.
Little jittery?
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, just be glad AJ's not here.
It's the logoed microphones, if anything, that gave me the jitters.
I mean, we're high class.
This
I don't know
is.
if you guys have noticed when Chris and Jules have posted pictures when they put the podcast out on social media, but right around Christmas time, our mic's got an upgrade where we have a branded, I don't know what you call it, like
Mic cover?
Logo box cover on our microphones that say, let's talk about that. Word on the street is maybe this year there could be some t-shirts coming that say, let's talk about that.
Going on tour.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. So, Will, you have to know that every time somebody comes on the podcast for the first time, there's one question that everybody gets asked. And you've listened to the podcast, so you've heard this question before. So I'm curious, Mr. McCrea, if you were a flavor, what flavor would you be?
I have taken a considerable amount of time trying to figure out this
This
question.
brings joy to my heart right now, Trey.
It has. I've listened to a few of these, and I thought, what in the world would I be? What flavor? I think I've landed on unsweet tea with a slice of lemon.
Wow.
Now hear me out.
What? My mind just locked up for a minute. I've got to hear the explanation of this.
Okay, I'm a very utilitarian type person.
Biggest word ever used on the podcast. I love that.
So, sugar, unnecessary. Not that I'm a health nut, but when it comes to tea, I've got enough caffeine in me to energize the lightweights, but I'm not like a bang energy like AJ. You know what I mean? I don't energize
a bang with a monster and rock star kicker.
Yep. And the lemon is probably the Holy Spirit reducing or covering the bitterness in my life. You know what I'm saying?
That is the best answer we've ever been given. That's phenomenal. That is a good answer, and I can tell that you were ready for that question. So shout out to you. I think that's great, Trey. If I remember correctly, you had one of the worst answers.
Yeah, I was like maybe the first or second person to be asked. I wasn't prepared.
You were the first.
I wet the bed. This moment was too big.
I'm gonna give you a chance to redeem yourself right here. I think the only person who's ever been asked this twice.
Okay.
If you were a flavor, what flavor would you be?
Teriyaki.
Okay.
Yeah,
Why?
Teriyaki. You know, it's a little sweet, but it's not everybody's favorite. You know. You know. I'm good on wings, you know?
Good on wings. Yeah. I love that. All right. That's good. I love every time I ask that question. Every time we ask me that question, I have one of our devoted listeners' face pop up into my head telling me, I hate when y'all ask people that question. So, hey, you know, again, we must be teriyaki. Not for everybody.
Not for everybody.
All right, that's good. Well, we've got Will and Trey on here to talk today, and these two guys go way back for, you know, several years now at this point, back before you both were married, back before you both had children, and back before Trey became a hunter. So why don't you walk us through just a minute, you know, how Will and Trey met and how you're walking into the podcast this morning coming straight from shooting ducks.
Sure. All right. So I met Trey. So I moved up here in 2012 from Gainesville. I went to FGC, and I met Brittany, who was Trey's like best high school friend. And so I met Trey through them, and they were friends through school. And also Brittany went to CO2. I don't know. Did y'all get to be friends at CO2 or CHS?
Probably CHS, but like it was all kind of all at the same time. You know?
By the time I got here, you and Brittany were like CO2 BFFs. Yeah. Brittany is how she introduced. Hey, I'm Brittany.
Sounds about right.
It's just stuck for the rest of my life. Brittany.
Yeah. So she's my queen of 5 points. I rescued her.
I love that. And hold on, just to be clear, it just hit me. CO2 is what the Orchard Student Ministry was called when Trey and Brittany were in high school.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, sorry, keep going.
Yep. So John Jackson then was doing a young adults ministry at that time. And while me and Brittany were dating, we went there and then helped out with the student ministry following that for a number of years. And me and Trey just grew tight through that.
I like it. What is the journey like to get a guy who's like, Will's an avid outdoorsman. Let's just say that, right? Like you're outside a lot, Will, and you like to shoot things.
I do.
And you know, that's something that I think you fit in great up here in this area. I'm from Taylor County. I like to shoot things too, right? But I kind of got out of the hunting phase when I moved to Lake City. Like I've been here about 10 years. I go hunting once a year with my dad and the boys in Alabama. Which, by the way, Will, I've got a great story to tell you of hunting with kids because you're about to enter that phase of your life. But Trey, you've never been the biggest hunter in the world, and then one day you walk into the office wearing camouflage.
Yeah,
I think that's
my life has changed
to
for
Will,
the better.
right?
Yeah, it is Will. It is.
So walk me through that.
Oh man, so I've always kind of wanted to do it, but like, you know, you kind of have to have land, you kind of have to have resources to be able to get it done. And I've just never, I've always had an interest in guns.
You got to have resources or a flashlight. Am I right, Will? Am I right?
Flashlight. Fair enough.
Brought to you by Q-Beam.
Yeah. And so we're in a small group together, Will and I, and we actually lead one together. And, you know, just over time, we've been talking, we've been, you know, kind of figuring it out. And to be honest, for me, the big thing was like the meat. and actually being able to put meat in the freezer.
Every guy who tells his wife he's going to go hunting, I'm going for the meat. You know, we got to get some food in the freezer.
Okay, sure. You know me. You know I'm practical, and that is like the practical side of me.
Have you ever seen the breakdown on how expensive deer meat is when you factor in how much it costs to go hunting?
Listen, are you trying to sabotage?
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Let's just say Trey might be the exception of how he got in hunting, because part of that, you know, being utilitarian, I think Savannah also saw the value in organic, wild, free range meat.
He just threw organic, free range. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. We're back.
Yeah. You don't get any more
That's
organic.
Right.
That's fast food as a fast food gets.
That's
okay?
right.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
And so Will was like, hey man, you want to go hunting sometime? And I was like, well, I don't have like a deer rifle or camouflage. He's like, who cares? Come on. And so went with him. We shot a deer, and
We shot a deer?
We shot a couple deer that day, actually. So I don't, without even giving too many of Will's secrets away, it was a good time. It was kind of a group hunt.
No,
and,
I'm great with that. It's just we shot a deer. It's like
we shot deer, and then and I got a taste of blood, and here I am. You know, does this have to be like an explicit rated podcast if I say
just
that?
because that I maybe so if we get an E tag on here, you guys will know it's not because I cussed. It's because Trey said he has a taste for blood. But my favorite part of all this is we get the picture. I think it was in a group chat. We got the picture of Trey with his deer, and my man's fired up. And like, I think the next time I see him walk into the office, he's walking into the office wearing, I think, the camouflage hoodie you have on right now.
Yeah.
And
probably.
you walked in, and talk to me about AJ and Matt's reaction.
About my camouflage?
Yeah, because, well, yes,
Is that what you want me? Is that really where you want me?
That's
to
where I want you to end up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I walk in. Matt is Matt, right? He's calm, he's cool, he's collected, and he's like, how was it? He wants to know like the real story. AJ, first thing he says, is that Realtree Edge? I'm like, yeah, it is, AJ, because that's what I got. I'm a novice here, AJ. And he's like, I can't believe this. And he wants to take a picture of me to send to another group chat.
Yeah.
So
where they're making fun of you about the camouflage, to be clear.
Yes,
I'm fully aware.
as a Walmart basic hoodie.
Yeah.
So it's downplaying camo.
And so I'm like, sorry, it's not Sitka, but I'm going to get there one day.
All right.
right.
So here's what I wanted you to get there, because this is a wholly foreign concept to me. We acknowledge that there's, right about a 10-year age gap between me and like you guys, give or take, like that group of people, right? Some is more than 10 years, some that's less. And when I grew up in Taylor County, the best hunters, the most avid hunters, the guys who, if they talked to you, listened, they didn't even wear camouflage. They had a pair of jeans with a hole in them, a gray sweatshirt, and an orange vest. And that's what they had.
The dog box.
Oh, they had the dog box.
Yeah.
Right? And like, it was just, today, when I look at like the hunting groups that I see pictures like from AJ and Matt and Cody and some of those guys, like it's the Sitka, camouflage, which, oh my gosh. Yeah. Just Google prices and you'll figure that out, right? There's a reason that I've seen Matt in the same Sitka jacket for 4 years now. So they have this, but then here's the other part of it. They have like these high dollar cameras that they take pictures of everything and they pose. And it's like, are you there for the pictures or for the deer? Are you there for the pictures or for the duck? And they're like, well, it's both. And I'm like, dude, if I whipped out a camera on the guys I used to hunt with growing up, I would have got beat up.
Dude, one of the best deucer stories is AJ kills this deer out, 30 to 45 minutes away from here, and calls Chris to come take a picture of it. And Chris,
no, he doesn't.
Yeah, Chris loads up and goes and takes the pictures for AJ. You haven't heard this story?
I have not heard this story.
Yeah. The high quality photo shoots. Yeah, that's AJ and his posse.
Well, I was going to say, I was going to ask you, Will, is that like a thing, or have I just been kind of led to believe that's a thing?
I appreciate good pictures. This is going to sound very, very proud and a little conceited. I'm running out of wall space in my house. So I have learned to really appreciate pictures of not just the harvest, but the people that were there. And you can't get the people that were there in amount. So therefore, I have grown to really enjoy a good picture of the group, the kill. It brings a story with it.
I can get a group picture, especially if you're on a group hunt, And I get a picture of the kill, right? Like I took several pictures of Chasen and his first deer, and even a video of him, following the dog that was tracking the deer, and everything. And yet we didn't spend a lot of time posing, and it wasn't with a $1,200 Canon. You know what I mean? It was with my iPhone.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And they're pretty good pictures on iPhone these days.
They are. Well, and I will say this. AJ, has been out on the podcast for a little bit. Matt's out this week. The reason why is because they're both in Arkansas shooting ducks. Okay. I asked AJ, how's it going? He sent me back a picture of their duck blind that was one of the, and I may see if we can get Chris to drop this picture in the show notes or whatever, because it was an amazing picture. It is the first picture that I've ever seen that made me want to go shoot ducks.
Do you have permission to put that picture on the internet is really the question. I got to ask that for AJ.
Look, do I ask permission before I do stuff like this?
As he picks up his phone to text him and ask permission.
No, as I'm fixing to show you guys the picture here, because you got to appreciate it, right? Here's the picture. It's a sick picture of the blind, but then what gets me most of all is Matt just posted up in the back of this picture, staring up into the sky, and everything. And I was like, are you guys shooting ducks, or is Matt posing for the next Sitka catalog? Is that what's happening out there? And AJ replies back, my man knows what he's working with.
I heard the mush.
So I'm like, you know what? Are we there for the ducks or the pictures? But I don't know. The pictures, they're nice. They're nice, I guess. I just needed to hear from Will. Was that a thing, or was that a thing for those guys?
That's mainly a thing for those guys.
Okay. That's what I needed to know. So,
but I can appreciate it.
Did we just divide the church right there? This hunting group versus this hunting group, what's going on?
Well, if we did, then, Jesus came to bring a sword to the earth. That's all I'm saying. So here's the question for both of you. Have you taken your kids hunting yet?
Am I still here? Sammy would pull that trigger so fast, not worry about where it's going. Absolutely not. Yeah, I have taken him out to shoot his BB gun, and that's dangerous enough. So we're going to wait a minute.
Fair enough.
Jenny will be 2 in May, and she's been in the truck while a deer was shot, and she's been on 2 dove hunts. It was illegal. Deer.
We're going to edit this out.
So don't worry. It was 100% legal. But so she's been on a fair number of hunts. I was worried she wasn't going to want to wear ear protection while dove hunting. She's pretty cool with it.
Yeah, good. So
we'll see how
you've
that changes.
She's never set a stand with you.
No.
Yeah.
No.
We're not at that stage of life yet. We're almost there.
That's
getting close.
Changer.
Next year, I feel like Sammy might be able to, and Jenny is much more common still than Sammy, so she probably will beat him to it.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you probably not, unless you got electronics and a stand that you can hide them in.
Yeah.
But I will tell you my favorite taking a child hunting story ever. When we go to Alabama, usually Haddon would sit with me or my dad, and then Chasen would sit with the other one. Haddon, is 14 now, Chasen's 11. So last year they would have been 13 and 10. And so that morning, Haddon is sitting with me, and Chasen's sitting with my dad. And Chasen isn't shooting last year. This year was his first year. He was shooting, so that's why he got his first deer. But he would go sit in the stand, and hang out. And so it was early in the morning. They dropped us off, well before daylight. And so Dad told Chasen, hey, why don't you just, lean back, on the wall there, and I'll cover you up my jacket, and you can just kind of take you a nap, and I'll wake you up when it gets daylight and you can see. And he said, okay. And so they're sitting in a box stand, right? And Chasen sits down, gets his blanket over him, leans back, and my dad had forgot to latch the door to the stand. And so Chasen falls backwards out of the stand. But the good news is it was only 2 feet off the ground.
Oh, praise God.
And Dad said that he reaches to try to grab him, and he grabs his, overalls right before he hits the ground, and Chase is just staring up at him. He won't make a sound because he's not trying to scare anything off. And so anyway, from then on, Chasen has been known at Master Rack Lodge in Alabama as the kid who fell out of the tree stand. And every time he goes hunting now, he triple checks to make sure the door's locked at the stand before he falls back out again. So, just throwing that out there. Hunting with kids is wild. Wild. So, let's talk about a little bit about the message from this Sunday before we transition to a couple other things. Now, this message was unique, not in the fact that it wasn't one of our normal messages, a part of the sermon series been going through, too blessed not to be stressed. This week's message was about rest and Sabbath. What was unique about it is Trey actually preached this message at our Live Oak location. So talk to me about that. How was the experience preaching over in Live Oak, and then kind of the message?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been to the Live Oak location, and just like, any other Orchard location, there's a lot of new faces, and that was cool. A lot of people I didn't know, and so nice to just, be able to talk to some people and then see some other people like Franz, like Michael and Beth, being able to just hang out with them and talk to them a little bit. But it was a good time, and this is a topic that is like super, in my opinion, easy to talk about, but way harder to practice.
Yeah, it's simple, but it ain't easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so for me, it was, obviously when you talk about rest and you have a, child who just turned 1 at home, rest is a pretty prevalent topic in your life because you're lacking it and you've been thinking about it a lot recently. And so I had, some life experience now to be able to talk about, with rest and why rest is important, and to see how it impacts our family as a whole, not just the adults, but the kids. When it's almost nap time, Sammy's not a very nice person at that time, and so like
I'm not either, if I'm being honest, when it's nap time.
So the practicality of it is real simple, but I really enjoyed the way that we talked about the Sabbath. I listened to Eddie's online before I went up Sunday.
What a guy.
Right?
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not going to lie. That is, what's what I tell people. If you are a young preacher or you're wanting to preach, I think we have such a great model for that, because you get to walk through the notes together, you get to build outlines together, right. And then because we record online on Thursday, you get a chance to hear somebody else preach through an abbreviated version of that message.
Yeah.
And that's like, not that you're going up there and word for word copying,
not at all.
That's not the intent, but to hear somebody else process that out loud. Super helpful.
So I missed the sermon planning meeting this week. Of course, every time that I preach, I seem to have something going on Tuesday, right? It's crazy.
You're a big deal.
So, but I did listen to that. And one of the things that I got out of that I didn't get out of the notes was when Eddie talked about like breaking down the Sabbath and what the Sabbath is supposed to be, how it's not just rest, but it's also taking time to observe and to like notice who God is and what God has done, is doing, will be doing. And I thought that was a pretty interesting way to take this idea of rest to the next level. Like resting is great, right? Like everybody listening probably wants to rest a little bit more, but that's not spiritual. Rest, like sitting down, is not spiritual.
Well, so this is the way I put it, and this wasn't in the sermon notes, so you wouldn't have heard this before. Yeah. But I said, Sabbath is more than inactivity.
Right.
Like inactivity is not the point of Sabbath. I told the story, and Trey, you've been at Lake City long enough. I know you've heard me, Will. You've been around. I'm sure you've heard me say the same thing. When I was growing up, when we went to go visit my grandparents on the river in Steinhatchee, we don't fish on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
We don't fish on Sunday because I think if we're not careful, we make the Sabbath just about not doing things. And that's really not the point of Sabbath, right? And I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. It's good to rest. It's good to relax. Like that is part of it. But it is an active resting. It's an intentional resting.
Man, that's a good way to put it. It's an active resting. Which is part of the reason I thought it was good that you guys were on here today, specifically you, Will, is there's a place for activity that is restful, right? So when I told the story about the fishing, but then we brought out the 7 types of rest, as outlined by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, and I thought that was helpful to talk about the different types of rest. And one of those rests isn't a physical rest; it's a mental rest, right? And so I said, and I took a minute inside of the service Sunday and said, hey, guys, talk to the men out there, raise your hand if you would say fishing, hunting, something like that is a form of mental rest for you.
Absolutely.
And hands shot up, right? Yeah. And the ones that didn't, I was like, guys, come on, I'm trying to help you out. But the inactivity isn't the point of rest, because, well, why don't you talk about that? Like, and for you, I'm interested because outdoors hunting is a part of your work, but knowing you, it's also a part of your rest. So kind of how do you differentiate that? And how do you find rest in the outdoors? What does that look like for you?
Sure. Brittany, tune in.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, if you look at anyone's schedule, when would you ever just sit in the woods, not say a thing? And, you know, before cell phones, it was probably a much better experience or more fruitful experience for rest. But you just don't. You won't schedule time to sit in the woods and let your mind wander or pray or just think about life the way you do sitting in a stand or sitting, especially when you got good weather. And
Yeah.
so
here's a question that I've asked before. How do you make sure that when you're sitting in a stand, sitting on a boat, that you're just as focused in on worship, hearing from the Lord, whatever, as you are from the activity? Because I think there's really like a blurry line there sometimes where we want to think, oh, I'm just communing with the Lord in nature, and you're not, because you're playing on your phone, looking at, Facebook, you got an eye out for deer, cast a line, whatever. Like, how would you tell another guy who's listening to this podcast right now who really wants to make sure that there is a spiritual aspect to this alone time that he's getting, and how would you point him in the direction to make that more beneficial, I guess is what I'm asking.
I'd say when you have that time and you're sitting in the woods or on the water and you're doing that mindless task, which is restful in itself, you get an opportunity to pay attention to some very small details that just reveal some attributes of the Creator. When do you just look at this little Tweety bird versus that Tweety bird and start noticing the little differences in them, and you think, wow, he created this into that level of detail?
Yeah. So I think what you're describing there, Will, is what I heard a pastor describe one time as letting it roll up into worship. And he was talking about eating a steak, and he said, I can eat a steak and I can enjoy it around good friends and the company, and I can appreciate the guy who cooked it. Man, this is awesome. He goes, but where you can translate that over to worship is where that gratitude, that enjoyment rolls up beyond the friends, the chef, and rolls into, man, what a good God that would make a cow taste like this. What a good God that would provide this opportunity for me. So I think what you're saying is, when you're looking at nature and the details around nature, is don't just let it end with, oh man, this is pretty. Let it roll up into, man, imagine God creating this and those details and those differences and him being that intimately involved in all aspects of creation. Is that kind of
what you're going there? If he went to the level of detail to make this little item so beautiful for your enjoyment, how much more does he love you on the things you actually care about?
That's good. I like that.
And for his glory, ultimately.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, that's this is nerd out maybe, but the Westminster Shorter Catechism is a way that people used, 50 to 100 years ago, some even still today, to teach kids theology. And the first question in the Westminster Shorter Catechism is, what is the chief end of man? And the answer is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And I think that sometimes we miss that enjoy him forever part. Like you said, like if God made this because he loves us and wants us to experience it, when we enjoy it with an attitude and posture of gratefulness and thankfulness, that's worship. That brings glory to God when we enjoy him and the good things that he made for us to enjoy.
Yeah,
so
you understand where it came from.
I think there's another side of this too that I have, reaped the benefit of. So maybe that's why I feel this way. But I think of Will. I think of Cody Singletary, who goes to our Lake City location, and they really use these outdoor opportunities to not just share a passion that they have with other people, but as a conversation topic to share the gospel with people too. I've seen Will do that. I've seen Cody do that. I know Cody will, take the time to basically guide somebody on a whole hunt, and then also be like, hey, by the way, this is what I believe. This is who I believe in. Would love for you to come to church and have more conversation about that, And,
yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's one thing I really appreciate from, like you said, guys like Will and Cody and AJ, who are avid hunters, fishers. They've got their trophy. They still like to get one, but at that point in their life, they also like to leverage this for the sake of relationships. And I think that's a great tool, especially in this part of the world, to be able to leverage those kind of experiences for relationships and then for gospel conversations too. Yeah. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think too, like I know myself and Victor Bocanegra, who's in our group, Will has kind of like Victor jokes, he's teaching him the things his dad never taught him, or whatever, right, with the hunting stuff. But
love that.
But it has, given Victor and I an outlet to experience some of this rest, some of this time that we're able to just, sit in the stand and observe who God is. And I'm not here to make a stance that like hunting is a Sabbath, but I think hunting can be used on the Sabbath in the right context.
Well, that was kind of, I think, the point that I tried to drive home in the message is that Sabbath is more than inactivity. But at its heart, Sabbath is learning to stop. Matter of fact, the root of the word Sabbath comes from the word cease, right? Yeah. That we are to cease things. But when we say stop, that's not like stop and do nothing. It's like stop doing certain things so that you can rest in that part of your life. Maybe that is stopping activity and just resting, going to bed, taking a nap. Maybe it is stop overthinking about the future and the what ifs that are coming and how do I, and just find that mental rest. Maybe it's like you said, Will, putting the phone away while you're in the stand and just stop consuming this oversensory deluge that we have, all the time. But I think at the heart of it all, and Trey, this is, I think, where we both landed our messages, is that Sabbath is the reminder that we need to stop trying to take God's place in our own life.
Yeah.
Stop trying to be God in your life. Sabbath is a reminder that there is a God who does not have limits. You're not him.
Right.
You have limits. There's only so much you can do. And so that's why we need Sabbath, not as an obligation, but as a gift.
Yeah, I stole kind of one of the things. I think it's you. Maybe AJ said it. I think you had a college professor there that shared this with you. And I use this kind of to wrap down, but you might be a great dad, might be a great husband, might be a great wife, might be a great boss, whatever, but you're a terrible God.
Yes, that's a Piperism.
Okay. Yeah, but that's a good reminder for us, right? Because God doesn't need to rest. Yeah, if you look in Genesis, he does rest, right? On the seventh day, he rests.
And so we would say God rested, right? Not because he was tired. God didn't need a nap. God didn't rest because he was just overstimulated.
Yeah.
God rested, one, because enjoying his creation brought him glory. There you go, right? He looked at the world and said, hey, it's good. It's very good. But then also he rested as an example for us. Mm-hmm. And that was the part of Mark 2 that I wanted us to take away from the text, is Jesus says, as clear as you can say it, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.
Right.
The Sabbath is a gift, not a burden. So I think that when we miss that, and when Sabbath becomes more burden than it does gift, we've kind of missed the point of it, right? So let's talk about another kind of rest. And I think, you guys can carry this conversation here. One of the types of rest that Dr. Dalton Smith talked about is the need for social rest. And for me, sometimes that's just, hey, I can't people. Like I just need to be away from people right now. I was transparent in Lake City. I'll be transparent for everybody right now. Look, there are sometimes when my phone rings or a text comes through or a message comes through and I see it and I just put it away.
Can confirm.
Well, that's just for you too, Trey. But honestly, it's just because sometimes, hey, I just need to not people for a minute, But I think it's also deeper than that, because to me that social rest is a lot of our life, our time, our energy is spent trying to be who we think others think we are. And so you always feel like you have to be on, you have to perform, you have to have that mask, whether that's too extreme sounding for you or not. It's just that you always have to be on is the only way I know how to describe it, right? And part of that social rest, I think, is not just getting away from people, but maybe it's finding people that you don't have to be, quote, on when you're around. You know what I mean? You don't have to be on. You don't have to live up to expectations. You don't have to perform or wear a mask. You can just be around those people. And I think that is one of the main benefits of when you invest in small groups, you develop relationships, and you get to a point with people in that group where that's the case. You just get to be around those people. And Trey, you and Will, you guys lead a small group together. You already mentioned that. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about some of those types of benefits, maybe that specifically, maybe not, that you guys have found in groups, because this hasn't been like always an up and to the right, easy, this is amazing journey for you as small group leaders.
Yes. That certainly takes time to get out of the awkward phase.
Yeah.
I mean, you're asking questions in a group at the end of a study that can get pretty personal. And if you're having a hard time trying to remember what their names are, which is me, like I'm bad with names, how are you going to dive into a personal discussion? So you're right. You're definitely not going to get that, just from once a week on Sunday morning seeing 100 people in passing.
Right.
So a small group gives you the opportunity to get that intimacy or that level of intimacy, but it still takes probably a year, I think, and probably everyone's different. There's open books out there, and then there's folks that are just more reserved.
Yeah. We pick at him all the time, but AJ is one of the most people-driven person I've ever met in my life. I am completely astounded by his gift for relationship and his giftings to manage relationships. Like, I have maybe 3 or 4 active group text, right? And that's all I can keep up with. And Trey knows good well because he's in one of them. Sometimes I won't respond for like 3 or 4 days to one of those group texts. But AJ, I swear to you, that guy has 50 different group texts going on. He can tell you what's happening in the life of every single person in every one of those group texts. So for guys like AJ, that's easy. For guys like me, maybe that's not so easy. It does take a while to get to that level where, hey, I'm with you, I'm all in, but that's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I think though, like this may be the perfect week to have asked that question. So our group, and we're getting ready to multiply. We've been together for almost 2 years now as a group meeting, and so we're getting ready to multiply and start new groups out of our group. But this past week, all the guys in our group had, like, in the middle of a Thursday, like a 3-hour conversation about personal finance. Like, that's not something you're just talking to, anybody about, right? But we're doing a study on finance right now, and there were some hard questions asked, and like, that's a byproduct of a relationship, like spending that time together, weekly. But now weekly has turned into like, we have our meetings weekly, but we get together outside of that on some level, like,
man, I think that's so key, that small group is not just the scheduled time that you have, but it's, man, look at you guys, right? When it's a kid's birthday party, who's invited to the birthday party?
Our group is the first people we invite.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So how would you help people who may be struggling to find that level of intimacy? What kind of advice would you give them to, like you said, Will, maybe press through the awkward to get to that level?
Yeah, there's never going to be a convenient time in your schedule, I think.
Hold on. Say that one more time for the people in the back.
There will never be a convenient time to join a small group in your schedule.
Yeah.
Whether it's a kid, a hobby, kids, plural,
Yeah.
So you're just going to have to make a commitment at some point and follow through with it if you want to grow in that way.
And to piggyback off of that, show up when you can, and at some point you will start showing up regularly, because the byproduct of those relations.
What do you mean by that? I think I know what you mean. What do you mean by that?
So you may not have the perfect schedule whenever the group starts because you're not willing to sacrifice some of those things, and so once you start showing up enough, you'll start to see the value of it, and all of a sudden that becomes a priority for you, and you will start to build that into your routine. Whenever that group meets, it's going to become a part of your life, and if it's done right and it's done with value, it will become something that you start to make a priority. And all of a sudden, now every Wednesday, all of us are free. I mean, very rare. Like, we have one person in our group who works every other Wednesday, and so she comes every other Wednesday. Brittany works sometimes on Wednesday. Other than that, it's we're out of town or we have something that's like beyond our control is why we miss. But our group is fairly regular. I mean, almost everybody shows up every week.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't want to speak overconfident on this. Chip, you could probably speak better to this. Are there seasons where it's not conducive to being a small group?
I would say that there is a very, very fine line here. So be careful if you're listening to this, not to hear what I'm not saying.
Right.
Okay. But I would say when it becomes more of a burden than a blessing, it's okay to pull back for a season. Quote, get your house in order before you lean back in, because what you don't want to create is codependency, which is, oh, I'm here and this is now my venting session, counseling session where I'm ruining the group for everyone else.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just honestly, we've all been there with somebody in a small group where it's like, oh, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But the reason I say there's a very, very fine line there is that doesn't mean if it's not easy, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's a line there where it's like, no, just because it's not convenient doesn't mean don't do it. Mm-hmm. But there are seasons, and I would say you have to have pushed through that convenience barrier and been invested. And then you hit a season where you're like, man, I don't know, this is a burden. I'm coming in and giving my burden to everybody else while I'm there. Maybe step back for a minute, get your house in order, like I say, so to speak, and then re-engage. But one of the things that I've always found helpful is make the group your plan, not your option.
Right.
Does that make sense? Make it your schedule. It's easier to cancel than to decide.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Oh, if we ever were at a place like we've been in groups like this before, but it's like, okay, what day are we meeting this week? We would never get together. So like we just have built that Wednesdays at 6:00 we're all getting together, and at 8:00 we're all separating from there. But it's going to happen every Wednesday, barring a hurricane coming through.
Yeah, here's where I've landed with small groups. The reason I asked that question to you, Chip, about whether there's seasons not being it, because I don't want to come off like a legalist, saying you have to be at small group. There's no excuse. But I think through my personal studying in Scripture, and correct me because there's probably some flawed findings here, but the church of Acts looked more like a small group, in my opinion, than our Sunday morning.
Yeah.
If you for the examples of correcting another believer, and then you confront them, and then two people go and confront them, and then if they're still not correct, bring them in front of the whole church. Can you imagine bringing someone on a Sunday morning stage to address an issue? I think it probably was at someone's house, and it was a smaller group of people maybe, and it was like a what's it called when you have a convention?
Yeah.
It's probably a...
Yeah. No, I think you're dead on there, Will, because in the early church, those churches did meet in people's houses. Number one, because there was not a public third space for the groups to meet in anyway. Mm-hmm. And number two, because they hadn't outgrown those people's houses by that point. They're probably bigger than a small group, as in, what do we say is our number? 15 is like a good small group. 15, 18 is a good small group number.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. But I think 30-ish, maybe a little bit more. I mean, I think
rather intimate compared to a Sunday morning.
Intimate. It's a space. What's funny is, what the average size church in America is? Right about 75.
That's interesting.
That's probably not too far away from what it would have been in the New Testament. But as the church continued to grow, that's when you begin to see the shift to a gathering of churches. And so I think a helpful way to look at this is that the local church is not the global church. The global church is all believers everywhere who have trusted Christ. The local church is a local congregation that joins together for worship and mission. Okay. And so in many ways, the morning gathering on Sunday morning is just an expression of the church in the same way that a small group is just an expression of the church. But the church is just the people who know and follow Jesus. That is the church, you know. But I don't think that we can hold hard and fast to the house church model as like, well, this is the most biblical model, because the biblical model of the church had nothing to do with the size or the meeting space. It had to do with how the church functioned and what the purpose of the church was. And so in different cultural contexts throughout history around the world today, what that has looked like to be most effective and efficient has shifted, right? So do you know why churches have Sunday evening worship services?
Because they have too many in Sunday morning worship service?
No, not exactly. You thought, though. I guarantee if you go around and ask churches who have Sunday evening worship services why you have them, they couldn't give you a good answer. But by God, if you try to cancel that Sunday evening worship service, we're going to fight, right? Mm-hmm. Here's why, is because when churches started in America, and even in Europe back in the day, travel was not easy, right? And nobody just lived close to the church, so to speak. So to get to church was an effort, which, by the way, is why a lot of churches in the South started at 11 o'clock, because people had to do their chores on the farm before they could go to church for the day. Mm-hmm. So they would do their chores on the farm. They would load up and go to the church. They would have their church service at 11. There would be a shared meal on the grounds afterwards where everybody would have brought food, where they eat together, they hang out. And look, I'm not doing all that work and coming all this way on the wagon with the youngins and then turn around and going home. So we're going to hang out, and then we're going to have church again together, and then we'll go home. And that's where the Sunday evening church service came from.
Huh. That's right.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's been a good conversation. I think groups are a really important part of social rest. But before we kind of shift on to one final thing, anything else? Any other thoughts you guys have about the message this week, groups, whatever?
Yeah, I do want to ask you a question. A friend of ours...
Sorry, I'm busy.
Yeah, a friend of ours sent this to me last night, and I tried to walk through it with him a little bit. But I think it's a worthwhile question because they may not be the only people asking it. So the question was, this week we talked about rest. How does rest not negate week one, where we talked about, being too blessed not to be stressed, and really kind of what they gathered from week one was, we've got to show up tired. We got to come in hard every day and exhaust ourselves every day. So can you just kind of talk about how those do or do not contradict each other?
Yeah. So number one, I don't think they contradict each other, because if you remember, we said that rest is not something that automatically refills when you're not working. It's just that you have to work to refill your rest. I think the idea from week one is that we are going to have stress in our life. You're not going to escape stress totally. There's no such thing as a stress-free life. And if you want to be a follower of Jesus, it's going to add, quote, stress, unquote, to your life. But it hopefully is a good stress, because it's a busyness. It's an as you go. It's a, hey, perfect example. We're not telling Will, hey, go hunt so you can share the gospel. Will's going to hunt, so let's look for ways I can share the gospel while I'm doing that. You know what I mean? That is the as you go kind of thing. The rest is that you need to make sure that you are finding places in your life to experience Sabbath, or else you will never be able to continue to pour that out into the lives of others.
Yeah.
So I would think about it like this. I'm reading a book right now. We're going to talk about this, more throughout the year. As a matter of fact, it's right here on my desk. It's called Practicing the Way. I think we mentioned this on the podcast before. And it's about spiritual formation. And the 3 steps of spiritual formation that the author lays out is to be with Jesus, become like him, do as he did. Do as he did and be with him are not in conflict with one another. But doing as he did flows out of being with him. So the way I would, reconcile those two things in the mind of somebody who sees them in conflict is saying, you're not going to be able to sustain a life of following Jesus and living with a, quote, good stress of being a follower of Jesus if you're not making time in your life to be with him and to spend time with him and to Sabbath. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Does that make sense? You're nodding your head, Will. That makes sense?
I love topics like this when you can pull a piece of scientific literature out which confirms we have a creator and he knows how we are to operate at our best.
Absolutely. Isn't that why? Trey, did you use that? No, you didn't, because I didn't find it till the weekend. I clipped an article from Bloomberg where it said Americans are sleeping more and we have less rest than we've ever had.
Yeah, no, I didn't use that.
Yeah, I screenshotted it and put it on. It was just the headline, though, because I didn't pay for the subscription, so I just screenshotted the headline. But really, there's studies coming out like, hey, just because you're sleeping more doesn't mean they're rest.
Yeah.
But that was the whole point of Sabbath, right, Will, is that God knew that Sabbath is more than inactivity. It's more than just, okay, sit still, go to sleep, you're going to be restful. No, if your if your stress and tired is an emotional tired, you're going to wake up just as stressed. So, yeah, good. All right, well, we'll run out of time. So I want to go shift to today's sponsor. Today's podcast is sponsored by Smags.
Oh, boy.
All right, so Will, we're going to do something together. We're going to do a little exercise together. But first, I need you to tell me about Smags.
Yes, we need to lay some groundwork here because it has been mentioned on this podcast, and your dozens of listeners probably need to understand it fully before.
Will's here to do some PR recovery.
Before it is just spread inaccurately. Okay. So Smags, She's Mad Again Guide Service is only here to raise awareness for the tensions and, dare I say, struggles that men go through who are passionate, committed husbands, boyfriends, etc., and also passionate in their hobbies, whether it be hunting, fishing, golf.
I was going to say,
paddleball.
She's Mad Again golf shots. I don't know.
Yeah. And, this is a very relevant time to discuss this because we're in a critical point of the year with Smags.
Ooh.
Yesterday was the end of deer season in Florida, this Sunday end of duck season, and there's a very short window between now and turkey season. So the Smags credits are running very low. And you have to replenish those credits before turkey season gets here because it's no longer Smags, it's going to be Skags.
Yeah.
She's gone away, guide service, and that is where we don't want to be.
There's Smags and there's Skags, and we can't get to the Skags, right?
Yes, there's a fine line.
Yeah, I love that. And, man, like you said, you're going to make withdrawals, make sure you're putting something in the bank. However, what I wanted to do today as we end the podcast, though, Will, is try to help you with some PR. Just in case we run into the what is Smags again? So I have some options here for you that I want to run by you. Number one, surrender my ambitions to God's sovereignty. Smags. Number two, serve many and glorify the Savior.
Smags.
Y'all losing me.
Number four, strengthen my awareness of God's Spirit.
Smags.
But here's my favorite. Stay mindful and grateful to the Savior. Smags. So if you ever run into a tight spot, Will, we've got you some cover Smags.
Okay, that's good. We've already thought about putting some biblical content out, some T-shirts with Proverbs 13, better to live in a corner of an attic in a loving home, with upset wife than in a lovely home.
That is fantastic. I would also say, when you're talking about Smags, just know that there was a Smag in the Old Testament who then drove a spike through a guy's skull while he was taking a nap. So
her name was not Brittany or Savannah, right?
That's Gags. That's not Smags.
No, that's you gone.
I do have to tell you real quick about a conversation we were having while we may or may not have been chest deep in water this morning. So we were talking about this pivotal season, and Will was trying to give Victor and I his fatherly advice of how to navigate this season. So we were trying to determine how many hours of massage that we need to get our wives from a massage parlor in order to be able to Smag some more. And so we determined that if we're awake for roughly 16 hours a day, that they need about 8 hours of massage a day to be thrilled for 8 hours, like to be happy with us for 8 hours. And so that comes out to like a little more than my credit card maxes out to. So we're not sure how this is going to work, but that's what we determined this morning.
It's like a 75% ratio.
Yeah.
That's what you get back. That's your return on your quality time.
Yeah.
It's good. He's got this figured out.
So they got 4 hours of this. You're going to get 3 hours back of happiness, I guess.
So here's
Smags
what
credits.
Here's what you need. You just need to know this. And I'm going to steal a line from my boy AJ. Just be where your body's at. When you're at home, be all in. Be all in. And then when you go, be all in there, because you're going to have to work when you get back home.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Let Savannah, though. She likes for me to go right now.
Yeah, I don't blame her.
True smacker,
Yeah, but if she ain't mad, you ain't hunting enough.
That's for kids. All right, on there, I think we found the title for our podcast and a final word. Guys, it's been fun. We're going to have to get Sir William back on here again, Sticks McCrea. It was a good time, and we hope to catch you guys next week. See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow in this journey of faith and embrace community. If you have more questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website and stay connected. Your questions are what make this podcast a dynamic and enriching experience. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who may find value in these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you and will help you bring Sunday's message into your week ahead. Keep the conversation alive, and remember, we're all on this journey together.